You're watching Let the Quran Speak. We live in a time in which chastity isn't considered a priority. Many young people have sex before marriage. Many adults also have sex outside their marriage relationships. Why does religion place an emphasis on chastity? How can a Muslim retain his or her chastity when society is saturated with sexual images and references, and when many think chastity is outdated and prudish? Let's answer those questions now. Brother Shabir, to begin with, why is chastity considered such an important value in many religions?
And this has not become clear to me why precisely this is considered to be something wrong. We know that many laws are given because they're harmful for people. God does not give laws arbitrarily and says do this and do that. You know, God is our creator and He should have the power to order us to do anything, but He doesn't give us arbitrary commands. Muslim scholars generally say that all of the commands of God are for some good reason and generally for the maslaha or the benefit of human beings, even though we may not necessarily see what the benefits are. Now, in non-religious communities, people may still practice chastity because they may be afraid of, let's say, catching the AIDS virus or other sexually transmitted diseases. And chastity obviously is a good prescription to avoid, and fidelity to one's spouse is a good way of making sure that one does not, by fooling around, catch these diseases. Sex prior to marriage sometimes leads to pregnancy, and many, for fear of unwanted pregnancies, would also avoid this sort of relationship, even without the constraints of religious teachings.
So because there are negative consequences that could arise due to this action then?
Yes. Of course, with modern devices available, both for contraception and also for avoiding the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, people may feel now freer, not having any religious constraints, to engage in this sort of activity, and then they may ask the very questions that you began asking. What's wrong with it, and what's wrong with religion for thinking that something is wrong with this?
And so many people looking at religion say this is outdated. Why are you still a virgin? You know, they ask young people. It doesn't make any sense. You know.
Yes.
Everybody's doing it. Why not you?
Yeah. So now to get more deep about this question as to why would it be something considered abhorrent, and why would God even bother to forbid this? If in our modern times we can avoid the STDs, and if we can avoid the pregnancies, unwanted pregnancies, that is, then what's wrong with enjoying yourself? Of course,
we can't avoid it altogether. The risk is still there, but you're right, it's minimized.
True. So then what's wrong with it? It seems to me that there are some actions that uphold a high estimate of human beings, and then some actions which seem to denigrate human beings. Often we distinguish ourselves from animals, and I know in the world of biology the distinction is very slim. But in terms of morality and our own estimate of what human beings are, we do distinguish ourselves from animals. In our social encounters, for example, we hold human beings to be of a different category than animals. We might, for example, study animals, but we would be quite shocked if it so happens that animals are studying human beings in a lab, for example. So while, of course, we still have to treat animals with the best of respect and the dignity that could be afforded within a certain circumstance, yet we are studying animals. So that shows that human beings have a sort of superiority over the animals. Now, there are certain actions which, if we perform them, it looks like we're not distinguished from the animals in those acts. What animals eat, we eat. But by distinguishing between good and bad in what we eat, and not just simply following our instincts and eating whatever we want, or whatever we feel like eating at the time, we are distinguishing ourselves by saying, look, we have a moral code, we have certain principles by which we live, we eat clean and wholesome things, and not the foul and negative sorts of things. Similarly with our sexual life, we have desires such as the animals do. Their instinctive desire is to procreate, and we have the same instinctive desire as well. But would we follow that instinctive desire, or would we control it, monitor it, and use it only in a certain channeled manner that is designed to contribute to greater good? And this is what religion does for us, in that even though we have these instincts and we would like to follow them, religion helps us to see a way clear, such that we distinguish between what the actions that will lead to good results overall, such as the preservation of that human sense of dignity, the idea that, this is something that is good, but I don't do it with everyone. I do it in a way that is sanctioned by God. My whole body, everything about me is it's God's gift, and I'm going to use these gifts in a way that is pleasing to God.
So now, there are limits to things that are pleasurable and good.
Yes, and unless we allow ourselves to or subscribe to this idea that there could be limits to things, then the consequences are dire. Let's say somebody somebody says, well, I have a sexual drive and there should be no limits. I just fulfill my desire, because that's my right as a human being. No God, no authority, no one to tell me what to do. Okay, what if the desire we're talking about now is the desire to kill, to maim, to rape, to steal, to do any of the negative things that we also abhor? Then, if the same principle applies, then it should apply here as well. And if we say that the principle is non-harm, you do what you like and what you enjoy, so long as you do not harm others, well, then we are back to saying, well, let's do whatever we want, whether it is something characteristic of human thought or human intelligence and intellect, or whether it is something just characteristic of animal instinct, and we're just following our animal instincts.
Do you think the limits placed upon sexual relations within Islam, and perhaps you can also comment on other religions, do you think that this is reasonable, or do you think it's going too far?
It's reasonable in that things have to be balanced. Even in our meals, we have to make sure that we get all of the right balance of stuff. You can only you have your usual percentage of you read your food labels and you see this contributes so much protein, so much carbohydrate, so much of this, and each thing will be labeled according to its percentage of your daily recommended intake. But you need a variety of things. Even some fats are good, and you need those. Some cholesterol is good, and you need that too, even though generally cholesterol is bad. So you have to have a balance of things. Now, what is the balance that we need in terms of our own physical makeup? We're not just physical bodies, but we're also spirits. We're personalities that are developing as a result of our actions. We are not only what we eat, but also what we do. When a Muslim says there are certain things I don't do, then that is registering on the person's own character in saying that I'm something special. I have a relationship with God. I have a spirit to take care of, and I'm making sure that my actions are such that when my brain changes itself, my brain is changing towards that which is wholesome and good, and it is becoming more conscious and aware of greater things, of my connectivity, not only with my own desires, but with the wider world and with the creator of the universe. So when a Muslim then makes this distinction, a Muslim is satisfying his physical needs within the limitations and within the guided system of God's ethical principles. And at the same time, the Muslim gives due attention to the development of his or her personality and soul.
So, I mean, you're talking about in the internal state of an individual, but what advice would you give to an individual who has to go out into the world and is often ridiculed for his or her stance on chastity?
I think the individual needs to be confident, knowing that the guidance we follow is not made up by ourselves. This is a guidance that comes from God. through our conscience and through the revealed Scripture. And if we do not follow this guidance, then we are lost as a human race. And there have to be a few people who uphold the high moral standards. Otherwise, we leave the entire humanity under God's condemnation. But as long as there are a few individuals such that God can look at the world and say, yeah, some of my righteous servants are still there, then the world might be preserved just because there are some people who are there upholding God's principles and following His guidance.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, how would an individual like this resist the temptation? Because sex is all around, it sells, as people say, and many people around have different standards. And so how would an individual retain his or her values?
First, as I said, by retaining that confidence and that trust and hope in God. Second, by associating with people who share similar values. The few people may be few, their numbers may be dwindling, but one needs to form communities and get involved and be active with such communities of like-minded people. Second, one needs to turn to the Scriptures of God and read the Scriptures so that will draw us closer to God. Third, one needs to be involved in spiritual exercises like devotions, so that this connection with God will give the kinds of pleasure which would substitute for and would be a different sort of pleasure of a much higher level than the pleasure that some people get from other kinds of activities, which are pleasures of the flesh.
All right, thank you for that perspective, Brother Shavir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we will answer questions we receive from you, our viewers.